One of North Carolina's most infamous cases, the disappearance of Asha Degree, was the latest to break. The thing I want to know is, where did this come from? Did you have it all along, and why wouldn't you have released it sooner? But now, in 2025, that green car is more important than ever. Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers. And if you are watching this episode on YouTube, you might notice I have a special guest with me today. This has been a wild couple of weeks when it comes to updates in cold cases. And one of North Carolina's most infamous cases, the disappearance of Asha Degree, was the latest to break. And when I hear cold cases in North Carolina, there is one name that comes to mind.
Hi, everybody. Delia D'Ambra here, host of Counterclock and Park Predators, and proud North Carolina resident for most of my life.
Thank God we have a resident expert on call for all things North Carolina. So let's not waste a single moment. We have a lot to get into. All right, it all starts on Valentine's Day morning in 2000. Asha Degree is 9 years old, and she's living with her mom and dad, Iquilla and Harold, and her 10-year-old brother, O'Brien. The family's apartment is in Shelby, North Carolina, which is about an hour directly west of Charlotte, if I've got that right, Delia?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Degrees go to church on Sunday, February 13th. They have lunch at one of Asha's aunt's houses, which is just down the street from their place, and then they turn in for the day at around 8:30 p.m. Harold goes to work at a second job that he has, and Iquilla spent the evening with O'Brien and Asha. Now, normally Iquilla would give her kids a bath that night, but there had been some kind of car accident or crash near their home that had kind of, knocked out their power. So their normal routine is basically just out the window for that night. And so because of that, Iquilla had planned to just do it all the next morning, which would be Monday, February 14th, which is, of course, Valentine's Day. So overnight, between the 13th and 14th, sometime between 12:30 and 2:30, Harold gets home from his second job. And before he goes to bed, he checks on his kids. Asha and her brother actually share rooms, so he was able to peek in and lay eyes on both of them at the same time. By 5:45 in the morning, Iquilla is up for the day, and she goes to start the kids' bath like she planned, do the whole morning routine thing so they can get out the door for school by 6:30. But when she enters O'Brien and Asha's room, she only sees O'Brien asleep under his covers. Asha's just gone. So the family searches all over their house. They search in the cars. They have talking to family members who live nearby, and they're getting frantic as more and more time goes by and they can't find Asha after doing all of that. So they decide at around 6:30 a.m., okay, now it's time to call the police. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office responds to that call by 6:40 in the morning, and right away, they're using scent dogs and sending out more deputies to look for Asha. By 7 a.m., the Degrees' friends and neighbors are all awake and they learn what's going on. And initially, investigators look for signs of forced entry at the family's house, anything that might indicate an intruder came in, but there's just none of that. In fact, based on what Harold told the dispatcher, which was that some of Asha's things like her backpack and pocketbook and shoes and stuff were missing, they're also considering whether there's a possibility she could have just walked away on her own. But for some reason, and a reason no one could really explain, her stuff is gone. Oh, and I might have forgotten to mention this, but all of the doors to the Degrees' house were reported to have been locked when everyone woke up. And interestingly, Asha did have her own spare key in her book bag. So I think maybe that kind of also made people assume that she might have left on her own and then took her stuff, used her key to lock up. Otherwise, why was everything locked up like that?
Right. Yeah, I remember the key thing. And I don't think anyone disputes that she physically left on her own. But I think the big question is why. Mm-hmm. And I know there was some coverage that said she'd fouled out of a basketball game the Saturday night before she vanished. But that's hardly a reason to just take off. I mean, I know that you're 9 years old, but no?
I think that's always been a bit of a stretch, of an assumption, at least in my mind. And it's never been definitively stated as the reason she left. To your point, she had a good home life as far as we know. So I think that people were just looking for anything. And that's the biggest wrong thing in the world of a 9-year-old. Anyway, fast forward a little bit. And the next big thing that comes up to investigators is that a motorist was apparently driving along Highway 18, which is this 2-lane road near the family's house. And this motorist tells authorities that they saw a young girl who matches Asha's description walking along that roadway sometime between 3:30 in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, where she is seen is like a mile from her front door, and she's headed into the town of Shelby. But at the time, it was like raining and storming, which I think is important. And other than the fact that this motorist saw her, it doesn't seem like they were able to gather anything else, and potentially because of the rain and the storm. The only really big detail is that when Asha is reported by this person, she is not in her nightgown that she'd been wearing when her mom put her to bed the night before. Now she's actually said to have been wearing this long sleeve white shirt and pants. So she's like dressed in her normal like day clothes. Now, there's another sighting of her by a truck driver who said that he made a U-turn to try and see if she needed help. But for some reason, when he got closer to her and asked her if she was okay, she just like ran off into the tree line. And that was the last reported sighting of Asha ever that we knew about at the time.
But then don't like 2 days later, the cops find some of her stuff?
Right, yeah. So that happens on the 17th. Authorities, who are still searching for her, by the way, like high and low, they end up at this rural property off of Highway 18, and they end up talking to this lady there who tells them that on February 15th, so that would have been the day after Asha vanished, this woman found a random Mickey Mouse hair bow, a green marker, and a pencil inside of a shed. And the items were just kind of like tossed right on the ground near the doorway of this shed. And when law enforcement, which at this point, by the way, includes the FBI, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, when they come in and they do their own search of this shed, they find a bunch of candy wrappers that match some of the candy that Asha had gotten for Valentine's Day weekend before she vanished. But this doesn't lead them to Asha, and they don't get another lead for more than a year after that. It's not until early August of 2001 that a contractor digging an access road for a new house about 50 yards away from Highway 18 near this place called Burke County, which is more than 25 miles from the Degrees' home. This guy finds a black trash bag buried in the land that he's working at.
Buried.
And then when he takes that out, inside that black trash bag is another black trash bag. And then inside of that bag is a kid's book bag with Asha's name and phone number written on it. And I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. You might know, Delia, but I, at the time, feel like I remember me and Brit talking about how he, like, sees this buried thing, again, in trash bag, and he, like, doesn't do anything. He ends up, like, telling his partner or wife or whoever at home.
Yeah, like, so his partner at the time was like, wait a minute, that's a big red flag. Like, you need to call the sheriff's office, because they knew about Asha's case, and they knew, like, what was going on. There was this little girl missing.
Even if there wasn't, like, a little girl missing, like, a kid's book bag buried in a bag, like...
Yeah, very strange.
Why does it take the wife to, like, make a call? But that's, again, we said that day one, the story for another day. So eventually, the sheriff's office gets their hands on this evidence. They do call the police, and they do search the property themselves, but they actually don't find much of anything else related to the case. But when they look inside the book bag that has Asha's name on it, they find a Dr. Seuss book from her elementary school library and a New Kids on the Block concert t-shirt. But the thing is, they don't really say much about those items at the time. They don't say if they were hers. In fact, if I remember correctly, I don't even think they tell people right away what was in it. I think that comes out, like, to the public years later.
Yeah, it does.
But they did send the book bag and its contents off to the FBI's lab for forensic analysis. And by 2003, some kind of results had come back. But the sheriff's office didn't release those publicly. And clearly, whatever it was that they got wasn't enough to solve this case, because it just languishes after that for another year and another. And then the 10-year anniversary comes and goes, then the 15th. There's even a large reward that they end up offering, but there are just no new leads.
Yeah, and I think the reward actually got up to like $45,000, but like nothing. And it really isn't until 2016, because that's when the whole, like, I think the green car thing comes out, right?
Green car, yes. This becomes super important. So, in May of 2016, the FBI released that they believed a girl matching Asha's description got into a dark green vehicle. And I see, like, in later reporting, like, pulled in or like more of a forcible action.
Like placed in by someone. Yeah.
They say that was seen on the morning she vanished. And actually, they specifically say that the car could be either an early 70s Lincoln Mark IV or a Ford Thunderbird with like rust around the wheel wells.
Very distinct.
Very distinct. So we actually have photos of each car. And as you can see, they're super similar.
Yeah, they're both, I would say I would describe them as like a two-door boat-like sedan, and they do look very similar, yeah.
Right. So it's the FBI's information about the car sighting that really grabs everyone's attention because it comes so long after Asha disappeared. Again, there was like nothing in all of those years. It's almost like the thing I want to know is like, where did this come from? Did you have it all along? And why wouldn't you have released it sooner? Or if someone new is coming forward, why wasn't that part of the story?
Yeah, it's clearly something the sheriff's office and the FBI discovered at some point in their investigation, right? Like something led them to blast that out to the community about this car and the sighting and everything.
Right. And though that happened in 2016, like we didn't know why or what it meant or if it led to anything. But now, in 2025, that green car is more important than ever. Okay, so after they released the car information, like I said, radio silent, 4 years, just nothing. And then in early September 2024, everything changes.
Literally 5 months ago. So news agencies in North Carolina, and I'm really tied in with a lot of journalists still in North Carolina, and they have been following Asha's case. They noticed that the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, the NCSBI have like descended on some properties, and they are up to something in Shelby. There's a noticeable flurry of activity on these properties in Cleveland County and also in a nearby county called Lincoln County. And one of the biggest things that emerges is that an older model green vehicle is seen being towed from one of those locations. And I actually dug up a clip from WBTV of this car, so I want everyone to take a look. And Ashley, you can see it too.
Oh, yeah. This looks super similar to those other two green cars that the FBI released back in 2016, which it makes total sense because like everything, like according to the search warrants, everything that the law enforcement agencies were up to in September, like this has to 100% be connected to Asha's case. So if you would, like I had you go get it was so funny that I also have to behind the scenes here. I tasked you, I was like, you got to get these search warrants. And you're like, you have to be like in the court system or they mail them to you. And I was like, girl,
it's so annoying.
You got to have a friend. And you're like, oh yeah, I'll just call.
I have friends.
Phone a friend.
I have friends.
So what'd you find?
So according to the warrants, authorities visited and searched structures and land on a few properties in close proximity to one another in Cleveland County. Like, so they were on like similar parcels or whatever. They also went to a property in Mecklenburg County, which is closer to Charlotte, so more in the Charlotte area. All of the properties in Cleveland County were owned by a couple named Roy and Connie Dedmon. Roy and Connie have 3 daughters, Lizzie, Sarah, and Anna Lee. The daughters are all adults now, but back in February 2000 when Asha disappeared, they were teenagers. So Lizzie's the oldest, she was 16, Sarah was 15, and Anna Lee was 13. And the property in Charlotte that was searched in 2024 was actually associated with the youngest, Anna Lee. And the warrants state that investigators were looking for like physical evidence specifically related to Asha's disappearance. And this included a lot of things like photos, kids' clothing. They seized the Dedmon's electronic devices like notebooks, business records, their cell phones, some of the daughters' like personal journals, a rifle. And they were also allowed to take any and all records for a man named Russell Bradley Underhill, who was a tenant at one of the family's homes in 2000. So the reason that any of these folks came on investigators' radar in 2024 was because they found, with modern DNA testing, the presence of Russell's DNA and a hair that was an identical genetic match to the Dedmon's youngest daughter, Anna Lee. And that was on Asha's shirt and from the trash bag that her book bag was found in.
So that's probably all the stuff that they found in 2016 that they we sent off to FBI. We found something,
did new tests,
but couldn't do anything with it probably. Right. And I looked at these too, and it seems like the Dedmons had zero connection to Asha's family, right? Like, as far as nobody's reported
yeah, they
that
did not know one another. They didn't go to the same church or like that kind of thing.
So the important thing being, like, there would be no reason for their daughter's DNA or hair or their tenant's DNA to be anywhere near or on her stuff unless they had some kind of interaction with her.
Yeah, exactly. And at least according to the search warrants we have, that's like the case, right? Like, so what's super interesting is that in February 2000, Roy and Connie's friend, this like Russell Underhill guy, he was having health issues and being cared for by a place called Cleveland Healthcare. And as a part of his care, which like Roy was in charge of because like he and his wife actually like owned another facility called Northbrook Rest Home, like Roy would sometimes send his eldest daughter, Lizzie, to transport patients like from that facility to like an area hospital called Broughton Hospital.
Which is so weird to me because we don't have any context for how they know him. And they do seem like very intricately tied into his health care.
Yeah, and like
he's
Roy's,
a tenant.
Roy's his like emergency contact. Like they're like clearly very close. They're helping this man with his health ailments. So now in 2000, the Dedmon's house was about 6 minutes away from where Asha was last seen walking on Highway 18 by those witnesses. And that road is what investigators say is like the most logical route for Lizzie, Roy's oldest daughter, to have taken if she was making like one of those hospital runs for her dad.
Okay.
And the search warrants also clarified that the vehicle she used for those trips was, quote, unreliable, end quote.
So what's the implication there, it being unreliable?
So I think it's just saying like it's an older car, right? Like it's not a brand new car in 2000.
An older green car?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So the search warrants go on to explain that Roy Dedmon has 29 different vehicles like registered in his name, and 3 of those are green. Now, when authorities interviewed Sarah, the middle daughter, in September 2024, she told them that back when she was a teenager, she drove a dark green AMC Rambler that her dad had given to her in 1999. And the search warrants actually include a photo of that exact car, which everyone can see. It's a black and white photo, so it's hard to kind of tell. There's like no color. And it's actually pretty similar looking to the 2 car images that the FBI released in 2016, you know, the Lincoln and the Thunderbird or whatever, that they believe Asha was seen being put into or pulled into. And if you look kind of closely, it even has like some front end damage that's pretty noticeable.
I saw that. And I think it's like important to go into this car in a little bit more detail, like just for a second. So this is a 1964 AMC Rambler, so pretty old, like which is what we keep coming back to. And according to the search warrants, it was registered to Roy at an address that was searched by investigators. Now, when it is seized by law enforcement, it is parked next to a house that Roy is renting to a tenant at the time. And this was the part that I thought was so weird. I don't know if that's connected to the car, but more just like broader strangeness of whatever was going on in this property that they got the car from. So the home used to be occupied by his daughter, Sarah. Sarah's the middle daughter. But she had since moved. And the guy who lives there tells investigators that in the 5 years or so that he has been renting from Roy, he says there are these 3 rooms in the house that are all padlocked, and he's been told not to go in them. Which, like, what?
Yeah, I would be like, now I want to go in them more like than anything now that I'm renting from you. But did you also, like, did you see that part about the hole?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell them about the hole.
So around the same time that authorities, like, also, like, speaking, like, with this tenant or whatever, they speak with a woman named Laura Dedmon, who I think is related to Roy. I mean, obviously, they have the same last name. But and she tells them that several years before this, she saw Roy digging a hole at that property that was, like, not just, like, a small hole, like, for, like, a fence post or something. Like, this hole was chest deep.
And this is after what year? After 2000?
No, this is after, like, 2016. Like, this is, like, fairly recently up until 2024. So, like, just a couple years before 2024.
Oh, whoa. Okay. So you guys are caught up in the car. That happens in September 2024. So there was a flurry of information at the end of 2024 where Asha's case was, you guys were DMing us about it. We were, like, kind of holding to do an update because we thought something bigger was going to happen. It took a minute. We weren't wrong. So that search wraps up, and authorities obviously have the Rambler in their possession. They also have fresh samples of Roy, Connie, and Annalee's DNA. It's also at this point that investigators come right out and say that they no longer think Asha is just a missing person. They now actually believe that she was a victim of a homicide and that her body has been concealed this whole time. But nowhere on any of the Dedmon's properties did investigators find a body or human remains, nothing skeletal. All these searches took place over the course of 2 days and nothing definitively connected to Asha. There were, as far as I know, no more clothing or personal belongings. Nothing surfaced.
Yeah, and I think right after this, an attorney representing Roy and his family, he makes some public statements about how that's a really important point. He's like, hey, this family has been named as suspects, but they deny any and all involvement in what happened to Asha Degree.
Right. According to coverage by WBTV, the family's attorney, this guy named David Teddy, he holds this press conference and he asks the community not to spread rumors, not to jump to any conclusions about Roy or Connie or their daughters. He states that the Dedmon family denies any involvement in the case and also kind of alludes to Russell Underhill perhaps being the link between the Dedmons, their properties, and whatever happened to Asha, which is awfully convenient because according to the search warrants and additional news coverage, Russell died long ago, all the way back in 2004. So it's not like he's around anymore to say anything or defend himself.
Right. It's kind of one of those things are we really going to blame the dead guy who died just a couple years after she disappeared, who can no longer be questioned or investigated?
Yeah, the same guy, by the way, who the Dedmons were clearly very involved with in seemingly his healthcare. He was in a healthcare facility and they're transporting him.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know why this attorney said what he did to reporters, but it still feels I don't know, just a little too convenient for me still. Anyway, where things get even more interesting, so this is why we're doing this now. On February 13th of this year, that's when the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office executes 3 more search warrants for the Dedmon family, specifically to investigate them for felony obstruction of justice. And it is these documents that I was the 2024 search warrants were great, but these were the ones we had to get our hands on if we were going to do this update episode, because what these warrants reveal are emails, text messages, cloud data, and phone calls between Roy, his daughters, and one of their ex-husbands. And some of these communications are head-turning, to say the very least.
Yeah, I think that's just one way of describing it. And so looking through the warrants, because I went through all of them page by page, and they are specifically for the contents of 3 Apple iPhones. One that belongs to Lizzie, another that belongs to Roy, and another that belongs to Sarah.
Right. And just to remind, so for our listeners, Lizzie is Roy's oldest daughter, Sarah is the middle, Anna Lee would have been the youngest. So according to the search warrants, when authorities executed those searches in September at the family members' homes and properties, Lizzie spent a lot of time on her phone while all of that was going on. Her sisters, Sarah and Anna Lee, called her, then Roy called her, and then Lizzie called Roy. And so the search warrants contain pages and pages of texts. But Delia, you pulled some of the messages that seemed to really stand out to investigators. I think we need to kind of go through these because this is I think the crux of everything.
Yeah, I did. And so there's a couple exchanges, but there is a text exchange between Anna Lee and Lizzie on September 10th, 2024, where Anna Lee says, "I am so sorry I just said all that. I am just in complete shock." And then later that same day, Sarah texted Lizzie, "They think it's our shirt. It's not her shirt. Her mom said it wasn't hers. I don't remember that shirt. I'm scared, though. Dad is probably going to be a huge suspect."
And I assume they mean that band T-shirt that they found in her backpack. They
yes,
don't say
that's
that,
what I have to assume
okay.
they're referring to, because that's all we kind of know at this point. So the next day, September 11th, 2024, Lizzie's ex-husband texted her that he was sorry, her family was going through the situation. And then a few hours after that, Anna Lee texted Lizzie.
Youngest texting oldest.
Yeah. "Lizzie, you don't need to be talking to anyone. I'm at the lawyer's office now. They advise we should all not talk to them without representation." Now, Lizzie then texted her ex-husband, "This is going to get nothing but worse. I'm talking to my doctor at 5 to get something for my nerves. I'm just so worried. So worried. I mean, it's a nightmare that's going to keep getting worse. I can see nothing good happening anytime soon, and I'm an optimist.
They're so weird.
It's wild, like, when you read texts, like, you know, I think we should all keep the caveat of, like, yes, they are texts. They're just words on a page. But at the same time, like, it is, like...
It's clear what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's clear what they're talking about, yeah.
So it's the next few messages that I think are the most interesting. So this comes the day after the ones you just read. And this is from Sarah, the middle daughter, to Lizzie, the oldest. Sarah says, I just talked to David Teddy, who is the family lawyer. I just talked to David Teddy. The theory is I did it. Accident. Covered it up. And Lizzie later texts her ex-husband again and says, I feel so horrible. So horrible. I don't know what to do. I caused this.
Yeah, like on their face, these messages, they don't sound or look great.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like between a lot of these texts, there are phone calls back and forth between Sarah, Lizzie, Lizzie's ex-husband, Anna Lee, Roy. Like, they're all playing phone tag. And after all of this, it seems like everyone clams up and they aren't talking to investigators anymore. So after September 28th, there's another string of messages between Sarah and Lizzie. And it starts with Lizzie saying, I'm just so anxious about, like, what's going on behind the scenes. Like, what are they doing now? What's going to happen to me since I wouldn't talk to them? To which Sarah replies, I know, girl, I am a disaster. I think if they come at you again, you just go and be compliant. That's what I'm planning on doing. And then Lizzie writes back, I think so too, honestly. I mean, I want to do what Dad says, but damn. To which Sarah replies with, and maybe we should have let you do what you originally wanted to do. But we don't know what that is. Now, on February 10th, authorities ask Lizzie to take a polygraph, which she does. But according to what investigators put in their search warrants, the results of that test show signs of deception. And that same day, investigators also visit Sarah and ask her for another interview, but this time she declines. So at this point, it's really Roy, Sarah, and Lizzie that law enforcement feels pretty sure have obstructed or at least at a minimum interfered with the investigation into Asha's disappearance and likely death. Like reading between the lines a little based off of some of the FBI and other law enforcement officials' like previous statements, to me, it's feeling more and more like maybe what happened to Asha was some sort of accident. Maybe it was a hit and run. But it seems like then they're thinking it was allegedly covered up by Roy or Connie, possibly also the daughters. Question mark?
Yeah, like that's what I was going to say too. It definitely feels like to me that maybe something tragic happened back in 2000, but then like everything that's gone on since then is just very suspicious.
I know. And the thing I don't know, I wish I knew more about that sighting that someone has of like her going into the green car. Was she going fighting? Was she conscious? Did it seem like she was unconscious? Do they know? And I also wonder, this theory of an accident doesn't explain why she was on that road to begin with, which I cannot get over.
Yeah, I think it's like that question of, again, why did she leave her house if she left willingly? Like was she lured? Like, I don't know. There's so many questions about her exiting her home, like her safe place, right? And going on this road. The only thing that comes to mind for me is that we know Highway 18 was going towards Shelby. It was in the direction of her school. She took the bus on that
She
that
had her
road.
book bag.
Yeah, like she had her book bag. The book that's in her bag, the Dr. Seuss book, is actually a library book from her school. So, you know, that's in the bag. It's like, is she going just like on her own little like adventure to have her own time and then is going to be back before they have to go to school? Like there's just so many question marks around that for sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything put forward that she was like meeting up with someone, or again, we've got no connection between her and this family. So if they're involved in some way, an accident seems to be what like police are posing, or at least in the text messages, what they think police are posing based on what their lawyer is saying.
And I think that's why, too, they are trying so hard to connect the routes between these families' homes, the healthcare facilities. Like, that's a really, really critical thing for law enforcement, is figuring out, like, could they have been on that road? When? Why? All those sorts of things.
Did an accident happen?
Yeah.
And the other big bombshell from these search warrants, it wasn't just the text messages. There is someone who has a story that kind of corroborates like this idea that it could be an accident and that these sisters were involved. So this testimony is from a local guy named Valentine, who authorities interviewed on September 18th of 2024. And it's only in the most recent search warrants, though, that we were made aware of this interview. So we didn't have them in the September ones. We just got them in February. But according to the documents, Thad tells the sheriff's office that in the mid-2000s, he was in his 20s at the time and hung out with the Dedmon sisters at bars and like house parties, like on a pretty regular basis. And at one particular house party, after Asha Degree vanished, he saw Lizzie, the oldest, sobbing, like bawling her eyes out while seemingly pretty drunk. And she's crying, and he hears her make several statements admitting to killing Asha. But when Sarah, her sister, overhears her sister say this, she immediately grabs Lizzie's head and tells her to, quote, shut the f up. Now, that reaction from Sarah kind of caught Thad off guard because he always knew Sarah to be very calm, a very nice person. So this story is wild. I don't know why we're learning the story. Like, where was Thad in 2000? And to make sure he wasn't lying, investigators had him take a polygraph, and he passed with flying colors.
No, I know, though. Ashley,
I know,
I feel
you're on Crime Junkie, never take a polygraph.
Meh on polygraph tests. But, to me, though, it seems somewhat notable that they were let's double down on this. Let's make sure he, passes this test to make sure he's not just making this up and trying to draw attention to himself.
Totally. I don't think a polygraph is the end all be all, but if the dude's not lying, the story he told is worth looking into. And with everything else we're finding, it's making a lot of sense.
Agreed, yeah.
So as of this recording, no formal arrests have been made in the case and no human remains have been found. But I feel like I've said this many times before, this case seems to just keep evolving every day. New updates and maybe even possible arrests could come literally any second now, even by the time this episode gets out. And that is a good thing because Asha's family has waited 25 agonizing years to learn what really happened to her.
Earlier this month, they told WBTV and reporter Ken Lemon that, they're always going to hold on to hope that, their baby girl will come home to them one day. And Asha's mom, Iquilla, told the news agency, quote, I believe she is still alive, and until somebody can prove me wrong, I'm still going to believe that because I have hope, end quote.
So if you have any information about the disappearance of Asha Degree or the individuals we've discussed in this episode, please call the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at 704-484-4788, or you can contact the FBI Charlotte office at 704-672-6100. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss a single case update and you don't miss the new episodes we're posting every week.